objectives are really how do you create change agents? How do you create young leaders who can work together? But specifically for that, we want to help people understand the energy system. So we're firm believers that you can't change a system you don't understand.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide. Thank you so much for being with us again this week. So today we're going to have a conversation with the Director of Student Energy. And I really love the organization because of what they do. So they focus heavily on equipping the next generation of leaders in the energy industry. And so far with the conversation, we see that young people have come to have more and more active roles, more people becoming interested in energy or climate in general because it's one of the most pressing issues of our time. So it's very important for people to be properly equipped to go into the industries, the sectors they want, whether it's government, politics, or if it's the private sector, and really make meaningful impact, to take advantage of chances that they have, and to represent themselves and the communities they come from with the most grace and leads to the most amount of impact. So this is going to be something that if you're looking at really getting actively involved, this is the perfect place to start. I'm really happy to share this episode and I hope that you guys love it. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the episode with Meredith Adler.
Yeah, so my name is Meredith Adler. I'm the Executive Director of Student Energy Global. So we're an international charity that's working on creating the next generation of energy leaders. And so really what we focus on is how do you build the skills that young people need to be able to be leaders in the energy industry, specifically aimed at a sustainable energy future, which we consider to be both one that is climate safe, so reduces carbon, but then also equitable. How do you bring energy access to everyone in the world who doesn't have it yet? So those are two focuses around how we want to build those skill sets. And then we also work with what we call actors in the energy system, so governments and companies, to help them understand what the value is that young people bring to their objectives and mission, and how they can better work with young people and provide leadership for young people. So that's a quick view of what we do. We have a whole bunch of different programs and pieces as well. We have our International Student Energy Summit. It's the largest summit in the world for students on energy, and it happens every other year, hosted by a group of students at a university who bid to host it and work with us to put it all together. We have a chapters program, so university level clubs where we teach students how to take action on energy, and we have about 40 of those in 25 different countries. And then we have our energy systems map. So it's a large-scale energy learning platform. And finally, a leaders fellowship program. So it's a virtual fellowship program that we do to help young people take on projects, but also to get them mentorship from some of the world's leads in energy and energy expertise.
Okay, so I'm really curious how you got started and got involved in energy. Was this directly related to what you originally studied? And did you immediately get into the energy space? So how was that introduction for you?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about my story and then also tell you student energy's story because I think both are interesting. And so for me, I actually started off as an exchange student in Argentina. I took a year between high school and college to go actually study there, and took a lot of history classes actually, and learned a lot about kind of neocolonialism and human rights and things that you don't learn as much about in North America, and became really fascinated with that. And so went to university to study human geography actually, which is like a very social science piece. Really fascinated by human rights, international development, but ultimately kind of coming around to the fact that there's a lot of these big policy problems that are really complicated that are what's holding us back. So things like around water policy and then energy and environmental policy is what I kind of found to be beneath a lot of problems in issues with neocolonialism and things like that. So I became very fascinated with those things. So academically, that's where I came from. And then kind of on the personal side, I've always been fascinated by youth leadership. So I ran my first youth leadership conference when I was 16. and then went on to do a lot of youth empowerment work all throughout university. And so from those two pieces, I ended up with a job at this organization called Clean Energy Canada. So it was working on clean energy policy in Canada, and did communications and a bit of a policy analyst role with them for about a year and a half. And then as I was doing that, I was enjoying it, but really missing having a global lens to my work and missing working with young people. And so then I saw this job posting for Student Energy that was all about developing our chapters program. So it was all about how do you enable youth in their communities to act on energy. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I need. It's youth, it's energy, and it's global. And so it was really a magical moment to kind of find that opportunity for myself. So that's where I came from. And I think the interesting thing about a Student Energy story is that it also kind of sparked from really kind of humble beginnings. It was actually university students at the University of Calgary, which is kind of in the heart of Canada's oil and gas industry, if you will, who were working in the oil and gas industry and going to school back in 2009 and really wanting to talk about climate change and sustainability. But at the time, that's not anything that was spoken about in the city really, or in the industry. And so they felt very much like they were kind of getting pushed aside at conferences, not really able to talk about these things. So they decided to start Student Energy with our first International Student Energy Summit, which had all the big name speakers in energy, but really all of the audience were students. It was 350 students from 40 different countries at that summit. And that really sparked a lot of young entrepreneurs and a lot of young people who went into companies and to the UN to make a big change. And so they realized that there was a real power basically to giving youth the space to start asking the questions. And that's kind of the foundation that all of these other programs have been built upon, is how do you keep filling in the gaps between what you get from a university education, or for people who can't access university, what they get from their communities, and what it actually takes to understand the energy system and then transition it. So that's kind of my story and Student Energy story, and where we converged.
Mm. Okay, so first, I find it kind of interesting that this was brought about by a bunch of students who are actually very connected with the oil and gas industry, because Calgary is probably the oil and gas capital of Canada, and it's very interesting that they felt the need so strongly to talk about this. And this wasn't like recent. This was a time when climate change and sustainability wasn't really a popular topic that the media kind of embraced. So I found that very interesting. So how was it in the early days starting this up and really having that conversation become more as an issue of focus?
Yeah, so I think you're hitting the nail on the head here, in that um, in the early days it was very much young people really driving the conversation. Now, obviously, now the difference is most oil and gas companies will tell you, oh yes, of course we need to transition. In the difference between them and what you think is the timeline, is how fast we will transition. Whereas back then people were not talking about transition at all. And so I think there actually was quite a bit of tension around letting youth lead, but also it was kind of a magical time in that oil and gas revenues were quite high, and so they were able to get sponsorship because there was just a lot more charitable sponsorship going on in that area at that time. And so it's kind of interesting to have it be very much ahead of its time, in that 2009 was over 10 years ago now. And when I started with Student Energy in 2015, the first meeting I ever had in Calgary, someone from an oil and gas company said, oh, it's really exciting. We can now talk about climate change in the boardroom. As in, like, they weren't really allowed to talk about that, or it wasn't really socially acceptable to talk about that at work before 2015. And so if you think about it, they were the ones pushing the conversation in that city and then kind of around the world, starting 6 years prior. And so it is an interesting thing, I think, because there's a lot of things Student Energy can do, and there's a lot of things our students can do, basically by being young, by being the ones who are, you know, can get a path not knowing enough, or not knowing, or not being part of the industry, whereas an employee or someone like that might be more expected to, air quote, play by the rules of that.
Okay. One of the major things that I've really grown an appreciation for is the role the policy plays in all of this. So my background being engineering, we just focus on the theory of stuff, how to solve problems in an engineering manner, very theoretical, very mechanical. But coming out of school and starting this podcast, especially, and speaking with people and really getting to the choke points, let's say, in actually implementing change, you start to realize the heavy role that policy plays. And I think many people are realizing this as well. And that's been the reason why there's been such a heavy organizing movement in the young people groups, that they're realizing that to actually get real change, you need to kind of go after people and corporations who can influence those policy decisions. So, have you seen that as a major theme in the operations that you've had so far?
Yeah, I think it is a major theme. And I think what you say about the policy piece is really interesting, because one thing that student energy is very focused on is how do we create multidisciplinary teams and help people to see things from different perspectives. Because what we know from the success of our alumni is anybody who is like yourself, is like an engineer who can reach out into other spheres and kind of, you won't necessarily have the full policy background, but if you can understand the value of it and why you need people who understand that on your team, ultimately any solutions you design will be much more effective because they take that into account. And then furthermore, if you can get the business background on board, you can start to make these holistic solutions that actually work a lot more for people. um, and then your question more so, and so that's something we really teach people how to do, really, is how to reach across on that. Yeah. So I think that's a crucial question. I think that's the main role that young people play right now, is their ability to start to influence people in positions of power. And that's something that we work a lot on right now at Student Energy, is how do you get young people access to the CEOs or to the ministers or people who have that level of decision making power? And then how do you help them be really effective? And so I think that's a huge moment for us, is that now that young youth has become something that's popular, like a lot of people are talking about youth. And part of that is that obviously climate change has everything to do with the next generation. People who are in their 60s are not going to see the worst of this. It is our generation who's going to live through this and need to be part of the solutions for it. And so it does actually give us a lot of leverage. But when you are given access, but right now what's happening, I think, is that people are given access to the conversation. Like we Student Energy, for instance, are able to orchestrate more meetings with ministers and CEOs for our youth who are in our programs, which we think is really important. But then what you have to do after that is actually continue the follow through. And I think this is where things are challenging, is that, if you get an invitation to a meeting, you then need to take it 3 steps further and see how many more young people you can get in the room, and then kind of take notes of what's said, what's committed to, and find ways to follow up and continue that pressure for people to do what they said they would do, and make it more than a photo op or make it more than a nice thing. So that's kind of the training that we try to provide people all the time, is how do you do that? How do you take that checkbox of we invited youth to our meeting and turn it into a window and a door and an opportunity for other young people to come with you and to start to change the system. And there's about 100 tactics for how you do that work.
Okay, so let's go to one of the tactics that Student Energy uses. I think one of the hallmark tactics is the Student Energy Summit. So that obviously is a huge event for you guys, and just the organizing skill that it requires is amazing on its own. So could you just talk a bit about what the program is and what it aims to achieve and what it has achieved so far?
Totally. So as I explained earlier, the International Summit is our flagship program. It's how we started. Um, and and it has many different objectives, but and we've actually mapped these all out on our website. If you look for Student Energy's Theory of Change, what that is our roadmap of what we're trying to achieve in the world. And so the objectives are really, how do you create change agents? How do you create young leaders who can work together? But specifically for that, we want to help people understand the energy system. So we're firm believers that you can't change a system you don't understand. So there's a lot of energy knowledge built into the summit. Um, And then we also want to help people build skills. So these soft skills that I'm talking about that are crucial around like fundraising, communicating, building your team, that's a big part of it. And we want them to feel empowered, to feel confident, like they can make a change. And then we also want to unite them with their global community. There's a huge power in helping young people to see that they're not alone, that there are other people that care about this, and that they can find their team to do this work. So those are all things that we're really focused on within the summit. But we're also focused on giving people a lot of access. So getting high level people in the world of energy or in governments to come and speak with students, act as mentors for different programs, do workshops with students. All of this is so that young people see that they actually have a lot to offer, and then that they also get to really learn from the knowledge of years and years in the industry, because energy is so complex. You need that historical perspective in order to understand what has to change. So those are all kind of the different objectives of the summit. And it runs in a really interesting way in that students from around the world actually bid to host it. And the winning team puts together an organizing committee. And Student Energy actually coaches those people over the course of 2 years. So, and then they go on to design the program, raise the money, recruit the students. And what's really important about that is it's ultimately running on a youth empowerment model, meaning that it's not me or my staff who decide who speaks or who funds or any of that stuff. It's actually youth who are on the ground, who are working through their own challenges, who decide what's important to talk about and how to bring their community together. And ultimately, that's an amazing experience for the people who are on the team. They pull off a summit that's as big and beautiful as any energy summit. It just happens to be run by a bunch of 20-year-olds. And then for the attendees, it tends to be a real launch pad. It tends to be a point where people really decide what to do next with their career, where they meet their business partners, or where they find their good mentors. And so that's a really important piece for us. And then I'd say, going all the way back to the political influence, being able to show governments or companies how well youth work together and how quickly they can work together, and what they can achieve really is a great leverage point to show why young people need to be taken more seriously, and why it shouldn't be the case that people feel that you have to be 65 years old with 40 years of experience in order to be taken seriously on what we should do next to electrify different parts of the world, or transition the oil and gas industry, that type of thing.
Something very interesting that you mentioned that I had no idea about initially was the way that you actually organize the the summit to actually give people the autonomy to do those things by themselves. It's I'm sure you've had lots of experiences of the teams that worked on these directly growing even before the summit even starts, because I can imagine the amount of organizational skills they would need and just a lot of other soft skills that are very important that you said. So like that process is very impressive. So I'm curious to know, just going off from the last one in 2019, what were the major takeaways from you from the event, and how were you different coming out of it, and with the people you met and the things that you saw, just as a general prospect, like how was the 2019 summit?
Yeah, the 2019 summit was incredible. I think, we had almost 700 students from over 100 different countries. So, and it is all thanks to the organizing committee. And I think, I have the the great pleasure actually of working hand in hand with them um, to make it all happen. And I'd say, what did I take away from it? First of all, I'm just totally in awe of the people who are on the organizing committee. Every single time, you select them for the bid and you think that they're good, obviously, but they just so impress you with the things that they'll take on or the challenges they overcome. There are always new challenges every time, and I think something that really defined this team was a level of determination. Like, we definitely had quite a few people who just didn't take no for an answer. And just kept plugging away with a very strong vision in mind of what they wanted to provide for their delegates. And that's just so amazing to see. I think I was talking to somebody yesterday actually about, the world seems really hard right now. Like there are so many different challenges in so many different places, and the news cycle is not super positive, obviously. But when you actually think about our students who ran our summit and what they wanted to provide for their peers, it and how strongly they believed in what they could provide and what those delegates would go on to do afterwards, those are the moments where you're like, it's okay, we got this, we're going to change the world. We just got to keep lifting up the people who are on the committee. So that's the biggest thing I take away every time is just being really in awe of how much people can progress in really only about a year and a half of work.
Okay, so going back to something you said earlier that was very interesting. Right now, the conversation is becoming a lot more mainstream. It's easier to talk about. You're having people in the oil and gas industry openly coming out and talking about climate change and need to transition to lower carbon economy. And you have car manufacturers coming out and openly saying that electric vehicles are the future and going into direct competition with Tesla in most markets. And the conversation is changing. You have politicians inviting young people to speak at events, and there's a lot more push in this. But as you said previously, there's also a lot of disagreements, even though there is this everybody kind of agrees that there's a problem that needs to be solved. There's arguments on timeline about solutions, about which energy systems should be favored above others. So being in the position you're in, being able to talk to young people and talk to business leaders and politicians, what are your thoughts on the way everything's progressing with the great energy transition that we're all experiencing right now?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on that. I think we're in an interesting place in that at least everyone is talking about climate change and talking about the need to transition. Nobody's denying that has to happen. I what I'm really concerned about is often I feel like people in the climate space don't understand the scale of the challenge when it comes to energy. I think over 85% of our energy system currently is still dependent on fossil fuels. So that's both for transportation fuels like petroleum, and then also, um, you know, some of the electricity mix as well, or a lot of the electricity mix. And I think, and why I bring that up is even sometimes when you're talking to people who are very focused on climate and really profess to know a lot about climate change, they don't understand that number exists, that we're at that 85%, give or take, depending on who you talk to. But that's a ton of carbon. And then also at the same time, you have a growing global population and the need to electrify or provide stable electricity for so many people in the world, for over 1 billion people in the world. And so that's not to say that that's an insurmountable challenge, but to say that I think we have to be really realistic about what the scope of the challenge is. Like, yes, it's great to be talking about it, but also how are we going to start kind of tackling it in bending that curve on how much of our energy system is carbon reliant. And I think, it's easy enough to say we should, just shut down all oil and gas production, shut down all coal-fired power, etc. But actually, if we did that tomorrow, the global economy would entirely crash. And I think, and some people, feel like, okay, that would be fine. Or like, we have to make sacrifices we have to make. And I mean, you have these conversations and some people think that like, that's just part of the sacrifice we have to make. And I agree that there are personal sacrifices that people need to make, especially people like here in Canada where we have a super energy intensive lifestyle. But also thinking that everyone in the world is just going to sign up for living on their own small farm is also not realistic. So where do we go? And I think we need to start having the conversation not just as people who are enthusiasts who are ready to walk everywhere and really limit their lifestyles, but as people who are part of a global economy and talk about also like, what does this mean for our global financial system? The returns on renewables may or may not be as large as oil and gas was, or maybe there's other products and things like that. And how do we start to actually have this inclusive conversation where we work with not everyday people on what their lives are going to look like and how they're part of it, but also where we work with large corporates and where we work with really powerful governments on, what does the future look like for them and how are they part of the future? And it's not to say that we need to pander to those who have a lot of power or pander to those who have a lot of money, but ultimately we need that power and that money to go in the right direction. So how do we do that? And I think, and this is not a student energy opinion, this is my opinion, but I don't think anybody's ever done anything, because someone else was like yelling at them and calling them evil. I think that, people do things and people feel motivated when they feel like they're part of the team. So how do we make a solid team to go forward on this?
Yeah. Okay, so something interesting that I've experienced, and I'm curious to know if you've experienced it as well, is the difference with the way people talk, be it from the energy space or whether from the climate discussion space or whatever it is opinions from people who are from developed countries who live in Europe, North America, some parts of Asia, and the experience of people who live on the other side of the world, the global south, as it's been put. So like South America, Southeast Asia, most parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, there is a very different reaction to. Let me just use climate for instance. So climate change is not really a big issue in Africa, and rightfully so because honestly, there are a lot more immediate problems that people need taking care of before we can get into the climate conversation because people won't listen if they don't have enough to feed their families. They worry about getting clean water and they don't even have access to energy at most times. And so before you can start having the climate change discussion, you must first talk about energy access and a lot of social issues. So it's a gradual process. And I'm just using a small case of some sub-Saharan African countries now. And if you go into conversations, I've heard people say that they want all companies to shut down oil and gas operations immediately. And I just pause for a second because okay, I'm probably biased on this because I'm also in Nigeria and it's a very heavy oil producing country. And just for the sake of my country and our fragile economy as it is, that will completely cripple us. And obviously, this conversation, this is where everything kind of gets complicated. We're talking about okay, we need to reduce how much emissions we produce. There is still a large group of developing countries that need industries. They need more energy as more people come into the energy system. So they need to expand the energy mix. And honestly, renewables or specifically solar, they don't. It's not at the place yet where it can be fully integrated. The pricing isn't right. There's a problem with batteries. There are all these like minor problems that kind of like add up and don't present it as a good solution. So the conversation is very different depending on what part of the planet you're on. So I'm wondering if it's something that you've experienced when you have many people coming together during your conferences. Do you see these clashing opinions and do you see this different viewpoints based on from their geographical positions or just where they are in terms of the economic value of their country and just where the people are in terms of mindset and just willingness to adopt new things?
Yeah, I think so much of this is geography based, and actually it's why the international summit, it's why it's so important to get those people from 100 different countries to actually be in a room together and be working on a project together, because it completely changes the entire conversation. And I think that's really important. I think what's different about our generation and what I hope we carry forward is that more people are talking about equity as they're talking about energy. It's not just about the fastest path to zero carbon, which you're right, would decimate a lot of economies as the world stands right now if we just turn stuff off. It's about how do we actually change the whole global system around what's equitable, who has opportunities, and all of those things. And so I think as you keep that to the forefront, it's really important. To give you an example of this, though, I think at our summit in Norway in 2013, there was a panel on smart grids. Everyone was talking about all this cool technology, on demand pricing, blah, blah, blah. And then, a girl in the audience raised her hand and she was from India. And she said, this is all nice, but we would like a grid in India. Like, my brother can't study at night. for his classes because we don't have electrical light. And that is one moment where everyone, who's from Europe, someone was in Norway, just immediately had to pause and say, like, oh man, we kind of had this problem wrong, right? We're like, and it's also a point where people who have a lot of energy access internalized, like, oh yeah, my ability to study, my ability to learn it, to live in a country where you need heating in the winter, all these other things are all enabled by my access to energy. And so it really does help people to, so getting that global perspective really helps people to understand that it's not just one thing. It's not just carbon. It's also your economy. It's your healthcare. It's your education. These are all the things that energy provides. And so, yeah, that's why I think the perspective is so important. I think what's unfair is it's often on the student from sub-Saharan Africa to raise this point and to make it clear to people who have a lot of opportunities provided by their energy access that they need to think about it differently. And I see that happen time and time again, where people have to, like, give a wake up call to people who have come to the climate conversation with a lot of privilege and with a lot of lack of understanding of how much privilege they have. I don't have a great answer for that one because it's really challenging, but I think we try to do our best to help people understand all the different perspectives. And I think ultimately, when people do have those face-to-face conversations with someone who's living in a very different reality than they are, it does help create these relationships and these new ideas of how to transition the energy system equitably. But it's not perfect, and it is interesting. Like, even we have a thing at the summit called the Innovation Jam, where people pitch ideas that they want to work on, and then they get into teams together. And one student this year pitched, how do we get enough baseload power into it was somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, so that we can have the manufacturing and factories that they have in China and other places, so that we can have that economic opportunity. And I think a lot of students from Europe and North America didn't even understand why he would want power supply for a factory, whereas he was like, this is a crucial thing for my country and my community. And so that perspective is just so important as we move it forward. And we're always looking for ways to kind of bring that home for people and help people to have a much broader look at the immediate needs, and how do we solve people's immediate needs for energy while also tackling the climate change problem.
Mm. I think that's a perfect answer, and this is why it's so difficult. I really hate to say this because I realize I say it a lot. The fact that I keep saying that energy is complicated, because it sounds like an excuse, and I don't want it to be an excuse. I don't want to be something that someone hears and say, okay, since it's complicated, we just put our hands up and there's nothing we can do. It's too hard, and everyone just go sit down. Because it's complicated, we need to be a lot more creative about the way we go about solutions. And I don't know if it was when we were talking earlier during the interview, Wayne mentioned about why it's so important to have this global outlook on things, to be multidisciplinary, to know that, okay, this is going to be an engineering problem, a financial problem, it's going to be a policy issue, it's going to involve the government, it's going to involve the environment, because a lot of things need to be involved in finding a solution that actually makes a difference. It doesn't just cater to a specific group of people who have the loudest voices or have been privileged enough to be listened to by the media and stuff like that. So this is where it can really, really get complicated. And this is where the challenge is: simplifying this message and reaching out to people to understand the other side of the conversation and finding proper representation. And the fact that your organization is taking strides to actually achieve this is commendable on so many levels. So I really appreciate you guys for the work you do.
Oh, thank you for that. We keep trying, and I sympathize with you on the energy is complicated front. I think it is so challenging to say, I'm not just making excuses for the oil and gas industry or something like that. It's like, these are actually real problems, and they can't be sound bites. They have to be conversations.
So with all the experiences you've had speaking with young people, you find people with usually lots of enthusiasm, not enough knowledge, or lots of knowledge and not enough connections, and just people who have one thing but need another thing to actually actualize their ideas and really bring them to light and make meaningful impact in the world, in energy and climate, or whatever discipline they choose to really tackle this problem. So, what advice do you have for people? The privilege of this podcast is people from all over listen. So you can have an African and someone in the EU or the USA or Canada listen to this podcast. So uh, experiences differ. People are different, judging from where you come from or the experiences you've had growing up. So, what advice do you typically give the young people who attend your summits, the young people who you interact with on a daily basis, who are trying to lift themselves up to a position where they can actually start implementing change, real change in their communities, and they don't know where to start?
Yeah, so my first piece of advice is to maintain momentum. Is that a lot of young people get really caught up in, am I doing the best thing? Am I doing the right thing? Will people listen to me? Do I have enough skills? And a lot of self-doubt in terms of getting into this space. And I think the thing you should know is that no one really understands as much as you think they do about energy. Energy is really complicated, and there's no way to learn about it until you start diving into it. So even if you're just starting out by having conversations with people who work in energy companies or conversations with professors, just start and just keep moving along, and you will find ideas. They will come to you. And then as you do that process, do it humbly, there's something that you can learn from every single person who you come into contact with, because everyone will have a different perspective on it. Everyone will live in a different community. Everyone will know different people. So the more that you can reach out to learn from other people, the better, because honestly, the energy system, as we mentioned, is super complex, but a lot of that knowledge isn't available in textbooks or university lectures or any of those other things. It's all kind of built up amongst projects, companies, corporations, governments, all kinds of different areas where you'll find different pieces of information. So it's really crucial to just maintain momentum, identify what it is you don't know that you need to know, and then find people who can help you understand that. And then just build your team. I think the team around you is so crucial. I'd say, I said this about the summit team, but I'd say this about our staff at Student Energy or our chapters. There's no way that we could do any of the work that we do without the amazing people who are on our team. And so, and they'll be the ones who keep you going as you try to continue to maintain momentum when you get a lot of no's or get a lot of question marks about what your big idea is.
Thank you so much. That is excellent advice. I really appreciate you giving me this chance and having this conversation on the podcast. It's always refreshing to have different ideas and talk to people who are passionate about their work and really happy to help people. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you, and my regards to the rest of the Student Energy team.
Thank you so much for having me on, and to all the listeners, definitely check out studentenergy.org. We have tons of different opportunities coming up all the time, and we'd love to have you be part of it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And to go back a bit to what me and Meredith discussed during this episode about energy being complicated, and many times it's being used by like excuses by people who necessarily don't want change or don't want change fast enough. And it's about time that we take away that excuse. And if you're here, if you're really interested in energy, I really like for us to form a closer community around this. Since we're a smaller group, we need to be a bit more active. So I encourage you, the listeners, to follow us on social media so you stay active with the uploads. Email us about what you would like to learn or things you think we need to improve on. Give us reviews, ratings. That's how we know if we're doing good or bad. So just communicate, and let's really build a community around this, because energy is complicated, but someone has to learn about it. So I really encourage you to be more active in this. You're very welcome. So this is the Energy Talk, produced by yours truly. Thank you so much, Jensen, for the music, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.